Great. Hello and good afternoon. We're going to give it a minute or two as people start filing in before we get started. Mike, how are you today?
I am doing great, Tyler. How about yourself?
Good, good. Looks like we've got a good list of attendees so far, so thank you for being present. Good deal. Well, let's go ahead and kick this off. Thank you again for joining today's webinar. It is a flood of data, the best practices for advanced stormwater insights. Thank you. So hello and welcome. My name is Tyler Biss. I'm with Aquatic Informatics. I am an account manager here and offer software for municipals and utilities here in the Southeast. As discussed, our webinar is looking at the best practices for advanced stormwater insights. So a little bit about myself. I have over 20 plus years in environmental and the water quality space, really from pre-treatment systems to laboratory data collection and RCRA waste disposal, all focused around bringing awareness to what's in the water and using water quality data to tell that story. So with that, I'd like to introduce Mike Roche. He is our technical sales engineer with AQI. So Mike, why don't you share a little bit about your background and professional experience?
All right. Thanks a lot, Tyler. Hello, everybody. My name is Michael Roche. I am an environmental engineer and one of the technical sales engineers here at AQI. And I've got 25 years of experience in hydrology as well as hydraulics. So I'm going to be presenting today around our storm watershed information.
Great. Thank you, Mike. All right. So before we get started, I have a couple housekeeping and FYI points. First, our audience member will be muted for the duration of today's event, so you can clearly hear our speakers. If you have any trouble hearing, use the Q&A function to reach out, and our admins will be able to troubleshoot. We'll be answering your questions live at the end of the session and really sharing a lot of insight today. But don't worry if you miss something. We'll send an email with the recording later this week. All right, so let's get started. So who is Aquatic Informatics? We are a mission-driven software company empowering utilities and municipalities with solutions that improve water quality integrity, streamline regulatory compliance, and strengthen resilience within the industry. So what are the challenges? Really, where do we go from here? With that, what are some specific stormwater data management challenges? Right? Protecting public health, protecting the environment, of course, regulatory compliance, and at the heart, increasing public engagement and building trust. So what are some internal challenges that we must consider as well? Well, large data volumes are massive, and it's difficult to visualize data and make decisions. Legacy systems aren't keeping pace with today's technologies and sometimes difficult to maintain from an IT perspective. Data validations and even correcting bad data is time-consuming and difficult. What are some reasons for these challenges? Well, budgets and resources are tight. Organizations were already stretched, and now they're facing more data. Data volumes are increasing year over year as technology is adopted across the different water systems. And you have multiple data sources, and it's difficult to identify a single source of truth. And finally, people unfortunately don't trust the data. Before it can be useful, people must have confidence in its accuracy. So why is that important? Water data accuracy drives water resource management, planning, and decision-making. Having high-quality data allows organizations to make decisions based on accurate, reliable, and up-to-date information. thus ensuring efficient and sustainable use of water resources. So great. This brings us to our first audience poll. So a little bit of participation from you on the call today. So let's go to how much time are you spending each month validating your stormwater data? I'm not validating stormwater data. A day a week, less than one a week, or more than 1 week. So we'll give you a couple minutes. Select your choices and hit submit. Great, looks good. Thank you for that. We appreciate the feedback, helps us. And with that, I'd like to turn it over to Mike, and he can walk us through getting started.
All right. Thank you so much, Tyler. That was great. Today, we're going to be talking about the path and getting started on the path to accurate water data. All right. One of the biggest challenges facing those that are new to the stormwater industry is how do we get started with stormwater management? So we're going to explore this topic over several webinars, and we're going to start today off with the basics and getting to know your watershed. So the data value chain is a great flowchart of how we can achieve insights from our stormwater systems. However, here at AQI, we've been asked multiple times about data collection and aggregation and review. So today, we're going to spend some time on the basics of data. For some small systems, utilities, municipalities, etc., just getting started is a daunting task, and we can face some obstacles along the way. Do we have any kind of historical data? All right, is it just spot historical data from when we had floods? Maybe we don't have any sensors. Maybe we just don't have anything to start with that we're aware of. Do we have modeling software? Do we have, maps? Do we have GIS? Do we have ArcGIS? What do we have in-house already? What if we don't have a budget? Or what if we have a small budget? And there's a lot more questions that we could ask here. However, more than likely, you have some of these tools to get started, as well as to gain rudimentary understanding of your stormwater system. So today I want to talk about getting back to the basics of stormwater data management. Okay, so to get started, like I just said, requires going back to the basics for many of us. So we really need to be able to gather what we do have and what we do know and what data we can find easily and quickly to start filling in the blanks. Okay. So here are some potential ways to do so that we're going to be exploring. All right. You're going to hear me talk about going old school for a few minutes. We're going to talk about field trips. All right. And some of the tools that we can use on field trips to gather that data. And then, obviously some of the internal tools that we probably already have that might be in a closet someplace or might be stored in someone's office and we're just not aware of it. So let's start with what is available. Topographic maps are common. All right. If you don't have any topographic maps, if they're older or if they have a very large scale between the contour lines, then, all right, maybe you need to purchase a new one. All right. You can also find fairly high resolution elevation data through the USGS. And if you do decide to get paper maps, and frankly, I'm going to talk about this in a few minutes, I actually do recommend starting with paper so you can organize everything. But you want to ensure that you get a couple copies, because more than likely you're going to be drawing on them and marking them up. to get started. All right. So that, like I said, really going back to the basics. We can find stormwater data from the National Weather Service as well as NOAA, and downloadable data from most locations and dates can easily be researched, providing you with a basis for historical rainfall data. Now, if you have any river or weather monitoring stations nearby, you should also be able to have access to this data, either online or requested from the owner, all right, whether it be NOAA or NWS or USGS. All right, it typically is published online. And like I said, if not, contact them directly. You'd probably be surprised how easily and quickly it is to get that information. So in addition to those data sources, do not forget the human intelligence and history that exists all around you. All right, talk to the locals who remember floods and stormwater issues. They can be an incredibly valuable source of information in areas that you're not even thinking about currently. Do you have a surveyor on staff? All right, if so, have them break out the equipment. It's time to get to work. If you don't have a surveyor on hand, these can be contracted when needed to help establish more precise data. So, once we have organized what we have on hand, it's time to really get started. All right. Use your topo and elevation maps and mark out the streams, rivers, areas of known flooding, etc. Now, as I mentioned a minute ago, or alluded to a minute ago, the elevations on the topo maps can be used to help delineate the runoff areas for the watershed. So, topographic maps in a paper format can be very handy to get started with. And as I mentioned, from an old school perspective, you might actually be able to find some light tables. Light tables are incredibly useful tools for helping to see the topo maps with delineations. And if you don't have one that's available to you, ask around your local engineering and architecture firms. See if one's available someplace else. You're going to want to mark known problem areas on the map for future data gathering. And you really want to gather all of the information and data into one central location. All right, there's a good chance most of it is not going to be digital. So be prepared to work between both digital as well as analog or paper mediums. You also want to try to search out designs and blueprints available for any kind of man-made structures, such as ponds, culverts, weirs, etc. Again, if you don't have them, try to go back to the firm that created them. You really have to chase this data down in a lot of cases. So that is one of the big keys here about getting started. Now, once we have gathered as much of the existing data as we possibly can, it's time to start filling in the blanks. All right, the best way to do this, in my opinion, is old school. All right, it's time to find your water gear, such as your waders and boots. And if you don't have any, go purchase some. They're pretty inexpensive. And some good common tools that you will need along the way, in addition to your boots and water gear, is ground tape measures or measuring wheels, preferably both, surveyor's rods or level rods, very inexpensive, incredibly accurate, and very useful for this. Depth gauges are also relatively inexpensive, and you can also make these from scrap wood and spray paint. All right. In addition to that, I also recommend landscaper's paint. All right. So you can mark areas in the field and come back and find that mark later on. All right. And then the scrap wood itself can also be used to mark locations, and it can also be made into makeshift depth gauges when you're in the field. And let's talk about field trips for a minute. So once we've gotten it compiled, all the data compiled at the office as we can, it's really time to just go start making field trips. Some simple starting points are going to be roadway crossings along streams. All right. And it is very important Don't simply measure the width of the stream. Recognize the overbanks and floodplains and measure from edge of overbank to edge of overbank. It's going to give you a much better picture of the watershed. In addition to road crossings, analyze the watershed maps and look for areas of interest. Mark complaints, washouts, regular areas of flooding, etc. For those areas, you're going to want to make several cross sections of the stream. Upstream of that location, several locations, typically go like 100 feet to 100 yards. You're going to want to delineate the distances between those cross sections based upon what you're seeing in the real world. If it's a really tight curve in the creek or stream, you're going to want to have more cross sections to represent the curve of that stream. So you're going to want to make sure that you have several cross sections upstream at the location, and then obviously downstream of that specified locations. All right, it's really about building an understanding of the watershed and an understanding of those problem areas. In addition to this, you need to measure the depth of the streams and water bodies that you're surveying and ensure that they correlate it to the correct seasonal data. All right. Again, if you're collecting data in April, correlate that to April. If you're collecting data in August, in the middle of the summer, you need to correlate that to August. All right. So recognize seasonal data changes. All right. While you're collecting the data as best you can. And you're also going to want to collect the depths along the same cross sections of the watershed. And this is where markers in the field will help you to keep those delineations of where those cross sections are. So, for example, if you don't have a depth gauge, but you're out collecting cross-sectional data, you can come back to get the depth gauge and still find the correct location for the cross-section. All right, but it's incredibly important that the depth is correlated with that cross-section and they are not separated. All right, now, in addition to this, what about sampling? All right. If you currently are sampling due to regulatory compliance, fantastic. All right. However, sampling outside of regulatory compliance can also provide a very good understanding of the watershed ecosystem as well as its stability. All right. If you have structures such as culverts, weirs, dams, ponds, etc., also need to identify these and make sure that measurements are taken at each and every one. Understanding the control structures in the watershed is a vital part of the floodplain management and flood prevention. So really, this is all about creating a picture of the watershed. All right, and that picture has to be detailed. So it helps to understand what is happening and when. All right, this also helps us to identify locations where sensors may be needed or desired in the future. Now, once we have gathered our field data, we need to compile it all together. All right, and this is really a great time to shift from paper to digital if it's available. All right, you want to log all your gathered data and correlate it into an overall picture. Personally, I recommend drawing in the control structures and using an identification system for your cross sections and structures so you can easily identify them later on. This can be done fairly easily using stream or river names or physical location names. If you already have sensors, the sensor tags or IDs, etc. But you want to make sure that you create a unique, and by unique, it means it doesn't repeat, identifier for every cross section and every control point. We're going to follow up on that a little bit more in the next webinar, but I really can't stress that point. Unique identifiers for everything from this point forward is vital to move from analog or paper data to digital data. Additionally, identifiers can be created for any additional data points in area of interest, and you want to compare the data gathered to any kind of historical data or reference so you can identify changes. and really just get a sense for how it has changed over time. And once you've completed that step, you really have the foundations of a starting point for the watershed. So let's get back and talk about some of the actual data itself. All right. Data correction can get very complicated. So it's important to understand some simple tips and tricks to help solve your quality control questions or concerns. All right. It's important to understand the data problems, review them, and then take them one at a time. All right. You need to understand how each error can contribute to the whole, and they can build upon one another. So let's just review some of the basic principles of estimated as well as simulated data. All right. You want to make sure that you establish estimates based upon the starting conditions. All right. If those starting conditions were measured in April, then that's going to be your starting time frame. All right. It would be April. Be aware that there is a large number of computer software that's available to help with the data management simulations, to move from analog into digital. Compare your simulations and any kind of estimates to the real world data. All right. So, if software says, hey, I should be at this headwater, go out and measure it. All right. Does it correlate? Does it correspond? Correlate that data together. All right. Make sure that any of the estimates and simulations match back up. All right. Is it repeatable to the real world? Is it verifiable to the real world? All right. And that's how we can determine the difference between good data and bad data. All right. Good is going to be repeatable or verifiable. So you really want to think first and determine the best correction techniques based upon your data. All right. So you want to look at everything from an individual standpoint as well as from a macro standpoint. And then apply, rating curves or, applicable, changing the time frames, making adjustments to the data. All right. That's where you can start choosing different data correction techniques. But start simple. Keep it simple. Start small and work forward in time. Do tiny steps, small locations. And if you take up small bites at a time, all of a sudden you chew up more and more and more of the watershed as you're going through this. Sooner than later, you're going to have yourself a very nice base map and very nice base model. Now, it is also important to talk about the calibration of data. All right. Calibration of data, it's really a never-ending goal. All right. That users have to be diligent about. There are a large number of calibration techniques that are available, and we can discuss those. But we want to really remember that calibration, it never really ends. All right. Sensors and equipment that we have in the field always going to need regular calibration and maintenance. So does our data. Your data has to have that calibration and maintenance. All right. And we can do manual data calibration by itself can be extremely time consuming. But again, it's just a vital part of our data understanding. And the accuracy of that data is going to depend upon the calibration. So several examples of calibration of data could be correcting elevations, all right, from the base map, correcting the base data for the streams and structures, all right, or confirmations on the assumptions by making field trips. From a calibration goal standpoint, really, we've got to remember that this is a long-term goal, all right? Full calibration is technically never going to be achieved because, well, Mother Nature is always changing. All right. A harsh winter, a harsh spring can change our streams dramatically. So we might have to go back out and reassess and do more field data. All right. So just because it looks great today doesn't mean that tomorrow we don't have to go back out and double check. Repeatability. given the same conditions, do you get the same results? This is a huge question for calibration. If the answer is no, all right, then your data might be wrong, all right, or more than likely the data is wrong. So maps, how accurate is your base data? All right, is it high resolution? All right, did you use high resolution digital elevation maps, or did you use a contour map with 10-foot increments between the contours? Huge difference in accuracy even from a mapping standpoint. And you want to really just check that. So if things start to fall out of place, your simulations and data just aren't lining up, going back to the calibration of the data and starting with the base maps is a really good place to start from calibration, especially if you started with more granular maps. All right, go back to check those elevations, go back out in the field, verify, calibrate, repeat it. Is it repeatable? Did I find the same value here as as they're recorded in the real world? Sensors and equipment. Well, calibration for sensors and equipment is just ongoing. All right, you need to have regularly scheduled calibration of the equipment and sensors, and this needs to be a scheduled activity. All right, if your equipment in the field is not accurately measuring the data, it's not doing anything for you. It's not constructive. All right, you need to make sure it's calibrated, or the data itself won't be of great use. And then that just leads us to accuracy. It needs to be confirmable, measurable, and repeatable. All right, I just cannot stress those things enough. And it's just important to note that Aquarius has several tools to assist with the calibration, such as rating curves, such as graphs, etc. All right, that can help you express this data and look for issues or problems. So let's spend a couple minutes on a few potential pitfalls. All right, because there are a number of pitfalls when you're starting out on your journey to understanding your storm watershed. First, you really have to understand the big picture. All right, don't get focused in on the minutia. That will come later. Trust me. The overall picture is going to be needed to get a firm grasp on the size of the watershed, the complexity, and the needs. Has the watershed been delineated correctly? Is a great first question. All right. Was this handed to you from years past? Or has it been verified recently? So these are all potential pitfalls. And the one thing that I cannot stress enough, this is where HUMINT or human intelligence comes into play. And I'm a huge believer in this. And you'll see me refer to this, and I think I had it earlier as Old Joe. The locals who were there for the Hurricane Agnes flood of 72 and can point at a wall in downtown and say, see this line right here? That's the high water mark from 72. You're not going to know that, but they will. Use those sources. Find those high water marks. Find those stories, all right, to help you, because that's going to identify some of the pitfalls that you may not have already identified. All right, the areas of concern or areas of interest. It might be from a potential flood that happened 30 or 40 or even 50 years ago that you simply are just not aware of. So that's human intellect, that human knowledge. Use it, all right, and gather as much information from it as you can. Now, next steps, all right, as I said, we're going to be doing a series of webinars around this topic. We've been talking about basic data. And moving forward, we, AQI, will be offering some additional webinars around sensors and data logging towards use of software analytics such as Aquarius. Now, from today's discussion, we're going to be pulling, we pulled a number of different aspects of this operation on the journey towards understanding your watershed and analytics around it. And you can see here, we've just talked about the physical layer. All right. But there's so much more along this journey. And so what I wanted to do here was take this time to kind of tie back into the overall picture of, we need to create that physical layer. We need to have, sensors if that is needed, the collection and correlation and communication of the data management itself, and then just, the fusion and analytics. All right, we have to start someplace. All right, so that's what today was all about, was getting those basics under control, getting that starting point created so we can move towards these automated decisions, alerts, notifications, reporting, all these things that are the final steps or later steps in understanding our watershed. Now, some of what, and this is just some of what can be done with all that data, once you have the basics done and are ready for analytics. Now, keep in mind, or as a reminder, the analytics in modernized systems allow us for this, all right? Allow us to look at the best practices for digital transformation of the data. It allows us to look for, human error in the data management. It allows us to reduce the risk from a legal standpoint. It ensures the accuracy of our data, which was, again, we need to understand and make sure that we assure or have a high level of accuracy at the start. So we know moving forward, we have a high level of accuracy moving, and are able to enable immediate action and access to that data. So really, some of our common end goals in a modern stormwater management system are to mitigate the human error in the data, reduce the risk, improve the legal defensibility, ensure the accuracy of your data, and to enable immediate access to the data for decisions for both proactive and reactive events. So now I'm just going to hand this back over to Tyler for a review of what a final solution can look like.
Yeah, it wouldn't be a conference without forgetting to take myself off mute. No, Mike, that was great. Very informative, great overview, and I appreciate the insight. So yes, as Mike said, let's look to the solution. How do we maximize your data, your water data? So let's take a look at how the city of Orlando really took a massive amount of data and created an opportunity to make data accessible to the public and actionable for water quality professionals. The city adopted a SaaS solution, which is software as a service, to enable the consumption, processing, modeling, and then publishing of water information in real time. The software solution helped manage the high-intensity stormwater events that cause localized flooding during seasonal rains. So the city's streets and stormwater division is responsible for maintaining and improving drainage to prevent flooding, ensuring all receiving bodies of water meet state and federal quality standards. They keep 2 million people safe from flooding due to heavy summer rains and seasonal tropical events. Their purpose is to provide timely and accurate information and empower quicker decision-making focus on public safety. So as cities move to more electronic monitoring and automation, there's an enormous amount of water data received on a daily basis, which can be extremely hard to access and manage across all the departments. The city of Orlando's existing data management was done in Excel and lacked any form of audit trail. Their system and QC/QA process were labor intensive and really prevented the capacity for program expansion. Gaps and anomalies can affect reliability and defensibility of your data. The goal, again, is to be proactive and not reactive, ensuring you present the best snapshot of data possible when needed. We have found, on average, the typical QC person spends the equivalent of 26 business days each year validating data. So just think of what you could do with all that extra time by having trusted data aid in the decision and event response process. So that almost concludes our presentation. today, and we hope this webinar helped highlight the differences between types of data, how they can be utilized in the stormwater industry. And as you'll see in the offers panel beside the Q&A on your screen, we have available downloads. I think we have City of Orlando and then a published document that Mike has for different types of data. So as you can see, we're offering upcoming webinars. Hope you can make it. And as Mike pointed out, if you have a specific topic you would like for us to cover, let us know. We'll be glad to put some additional material together for the next session. So with that, I would like to return it back over to Mike for our last audience poll and wrap up for the day. Back to you, Mike.
Thanks a lot, Tyler. And so our last audience poll question, and I apologize, it might have hit the forward button a little bit too fast there, but you should have the poll on your screen. And it's, are you interested in learning more about advancing your stormwater data management? Yes, I'd like to learn more. Maybe, I'm not sure. No, I'm not interested. So go ahead and select to the left of those, one of those three options, hit submit. And while those of you are just finishing up the poll, I would like to just thank you all very much.
Yes, thank you
for joining us this afternoon. We'll be opening up for questions and comments here momentarily. Now, all right, I'm just going to look here. Go ahead. If you have any questions, go ahead and type them into the chat dialogue, and we will start answering them.
So we've got a couple great questions here. Mike, are you seeing those on your screen too? Okay.
I am. So the first question is, do I believe it's better to start with analog or paper or digital? And that's a great question. As you might have noticed, I'm a little bit older school. All right. And I really do believe in getting out there and getting my hands dirty, getting the boots on. So personally, yes, absolutely. I would start with paper. Why? You can have a lot of unknowns. All right. There's going to be a lot of guesses when you get started. You may not know where the watershed actually starts and ends. All right. So a lot of those questions have to be done and answered. And to be frank, it's a lot easier to change marks on a piece of paper than it is to spend, their time doing it digitally. Once your data has been collected, then start moving into digital. Once we know what the watershed looks like, we've got those cross sections, we've got those unique identifiers. In my opinion, that is when, is the best time to then move into digital. All right. Any other questions, anybody?
Great. Yeah, we've got a couple here. Does the software require specific sensors to collect data? Great question, and we get this all the time. Really, our data consumes all. So, our software query essentially just needs a text data stream in a couple different formats. We can do file, URL, we can connect to databases, we can do password secure, authentic keys, etc. So it really is up to the end user to tell us, how can we consume your data?
All right.
And then as we mentioned earlier, we will record this and you'll receive an email notification later in the week. But really appreciate the time and the attention.
So I have. There's another question here that I just saw. What factor do you feel is underrated when acquiring base data? All right, and they partially answered hum in. And and they're absolutely right. The human intellect, all right, that knowledge base from, our neighbors. It is fascinating for me, even in my local watershed, where I've grown and, been here for the vast majority of my life. I can still hear stories from locals about, this creek flooding, or that stream overflowing, or that culvert blowing out, washing out, years after years after years. That key information it's really underrated. All right, in my opinion. All right, you're not going to find that in a handbook. You're not going to find that at a university. You're going to find that at the coffee shops, at the diners, talking to the locals, the barber shops, so to speak. That's a really great place for acquiring, unknown information. And then really finding out, hey, did that culvert that got washed out, or, 3 or 4 times in the last decade, did they replace it, or did they just put the same culvert back in? It leads you to other questions. So it's a very good question to ask. And, as I said, I really believe that the human intelligence aspect of this industry is the most underrated.
I agree with that statement. I like the the uncovering of data. There's so much published on the internet and this and that, but sometimes that's not headlines. So you kind of have to ask why and dig a little deeper. So let's see. Can our software integrate with sensors already installed in the field? 100%, absolutely. So we have a full professional services team that can really walk through integration, setting things up, and a lot of this, easy to do on your own as well after the initial setup.
All right.
Good questions.
Very good questions. All right, does your program include logging the quality of storm runoff? So, yes, I mean, that is absolutely something that is part of software analytics, and understanding what the runoff is doing from the stormwater. I mean, to be frank, that's really where the base data comes into play, and understanding what those, the overbanks are, the floodplains are. So when you have that, large scale runoff, you can make sure that you can actually capture it all. All right. And you have the right floodplain data, the right cross sectional data that's wide enough. It's why I mentioned earlier. I mean, and again, this is, my own personal opinion, but it's also an area that I think that can be undervalued. We sometimes forget how large floodplains can be along a river. All right. Because, hey, there's 5 or 6 farmers in that floodplain living there, working it, still on a floodplain. We need to include that entire floodplain from high mark to high mark in order to be able to capture all that runoff information. So yes, it's a great question. And the answer is absolutely, we can capture it, but it's also going to be dependent upon the base data itself and making sure that the floodplain data is correct and covers the entire floodplain and not just the channel.
So Mike, I see another one here. Maybe you can help speak to this a little bit. I can talk to it on my side. What advantages do users get by combining Aquatic Informatics and Hydromet solutions? And I think that's a great question. Big picture for AQI, Odd is a sister company, a joint company with us under a larger company. And under that larger company, we have several water quantity groups. right? Some sensor groups, instrumentation. Hawk is another one of our sister companies for lab equipment and testing. But that said, it really just brings that partnership together to, maybe you're working specifically with an account manager on sensors. Maybe you have a location with a lot of sensors and need a software or a tool to consume and make information on that data, or present that data to a web portal or something similar to like the city of Orlando, publish that for public consumption. But really working together, kind of hand in hand on the sensor side, and then AQI being the data or the software solution side.
And just to add to that, Tyler, and I realize that this isn't a full answer to your question. And the reason I'm not fully answering your question is because we do plan on doing additional webinars around this. And my hopes is to actually have one with Ott that focuses on our sensors, and the next portion of our topic is around sensors. So then we'll be able to actually talk, more about that and actually be like, hey, here's some Ott hydromet sensors. Here's, how the data management from both sides are are possible to help you. So more to come.
Great feedback, though. We really appreciate the time and the attention and the questions. But if something comes up between now and then, please reach out. I guarantee there will be some contact information in the recorded material that's sent out in the email later this week. But Mike, anything else that you want to add or share?
I just want to thank you all very much for giving us some of your time today. And I look forward to being able to present some additional webinars, and building off this topic in the future.
Yeah.
Thank you all very much.
Yes. Thank you very much for your time. And with that, we'll conclude a little bit early today. But thanks again and have a great week.